Working the night shift had always made me tense, but I needed the money. Back then, I used to drive from the factory to my house every day, about a 40-minute trip down a nearly deserted road in rural Missouri. It was the kind of road where, after midnight, you'd only see truckers and streetlights flickering from time to time. That night, the clock read 2:17 a.m. when I left the factory parking lot. It was drizzling, and the steady sound of the windshield wipers was making me sleepy. I was driving slowly, keeping the headlights on low beam because of the fog, when I noticed lights behind me. A dark car, maybe a sedan, was following at a fair distance, but what caught my attention was how it seemed to be matching my speed. I thought it was just a coincidence, but after a few minutes I realized that whenever I slowed down, it slowed too. When I sped up a little, it did the same. I kept watching through the rearview mirror for more than 5 kilometers, trying not to panic. The wet asphalt reflected its headlights, and that constant glow behind my car started to make me nervous. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just another driver heading in the same direction. The main highway connected several small towns, so it wasn't impossible. Still, the way that car kept the exact same distance didn't feel normal. When I reached a brighter stretch of road, I decided to change lanes to see what would happen. I checked my mirror and calmly moved to the right lane. The car did the same, 1 second later. My chest tightened. I tested it again, sped up to almost 70 miles per hour, and unsurprisingly, it kept pace. Fear began to replace logic. I remembered there was a 24-hour gas station up ahead. I'd seen it before, with a convenience store and a few bright fuel pumps. I thought that if I stopped there, I could be near other people, maybe ask for help. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to hide my nerves, and turned up the radio to drown out the sound of my own heartbeat. The headlights behind me stayed bright and steady, and the light rain made the road shine even more, as if we were trapped inside a tunnel of reflected light. When I finally spotted the station, I slowed down and took the side entrance. The bright lights were a relief. It felt like the danger had been left behind. I parked near the store directly under one of the lamps and watched through the rearview mirror. The dark car drove straight past, continuing down the road. I waited until it completely disappeared and then let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I went inside and bought a coffee, just to stall for time and calm down. The clerk, a young guy, noticed I was shaking and asked if I was okay. I briefly told him what had happened, and he just shook his head, saying, "A lot of weird things happen out here late at night." I stayed inside for about 10 minutes, constantly glancing toward the window. The rain had eased up, but the sky was still dark, and the only sound was the wind passing by the fuel pumps. When I finally felt safe again, I went back to my car. I adjusted the mirror, started the engine, and got ready to pull out of the lot. That's when I saw it. Across the road, parked on the shoulder, was the same dark car. The headlights were off, completely still, but I recognized the shape. It looked like it was watching me, even from a distance. I froze for a few seconds, my hand on the gear shift, my heart pounding. My first thought was to call the police. I grabbed my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I called emergency services and explained the situation as quickly as I could, keeping my eyes fixed on that car across the road. The dispatcher told me to stay inside the vehicle, lock the doors, and said a patrol car would be sent. While I was talking, the dark car stayed there, motionless, silent. No headlights, no movement, just that still presence in the darkness a few meters away. I hung up and kept watching, trying to figure out what that person was doing. 5 minutes passed, maybe more, before I saw something move inside. It wasn't clear, but it looked like a brief flash, maybe the glow of a cell phone. And then, suddenly, the car started. The sound of the engine echoed through the quiet night, but the headlights stayed off. It began to move slowly, unhurriedly, until it disappeared around a curve ahead. I waited for the patrol lights to appear, but when the officer arrived and looked at the shoulder, his words sent a chill through me. "Ma'am, there are no tire tracks here, only yours." Story 2. Working the night shift at the hospital had never bothered me until that week. I had been a nurse for almost 6 years, and the night shift was always the calmest. Few patients, quiet hallways, and the steady sound of heart monitors that, after a while, became almost background noise. The hospital was located on the outskirts of Springfield, Illinois, and during the night, most of the exterior lights were turned off to save power. That night, it was almost 2 in the morning when I noticed something different. I was reviewing patient charts at the third-floor reception desk, drinking cold coffee when I saw a man standing in the hallway, about 20 meters away. He was completely still, facing the desk. He wore a dark coat, the hood down, and kept his hands in his pockets. I waited for him to say something. Maybe he was lost looking for a patient. But he just stood there, silently watching me. I tried to smile and asked if I could help him. No answer. The way he stood so motionless made me uneasy, so I picked up the internal phone to call security. When I looked back, he was gone. I looked around trying to figure out how he could have disappeared so fast. The hallway was long with only 2 exits, one leading to the elevator and another to the isolation ward, which was locked. My heart started racing as I stood up and walked to the end of the counter to check. That's when I saw something that made me freeze mid-step. The same man was now behind the counter, standing in the dark, exactly where the reception light didn't reach. I took a step back, feeling my entire body go cold. My breathing shortened and I couldn't speak. He didn't move, but it felt like he was staring right at me. I can't explain how. The hood covered part of his face, yet I could feel his eyes fixed on me. I shouted for security, my voice echoing down the corridor. The man didn't react. Within seconds, the guard came up from the elevator, and when I looked back behind the counter, the man had vanished again. The guard searched the entire hallway, the bathrooms, even the emergency exit. Nothing. No sign of him. But the detail that left me most unsettled was the reflection in the reception window. His shadow was still there, as if he were still standing behind me. That shadow in the glass was impossible to ignore. The guard stood next to me, staring at the window, and I realized he saw it too. It was clear, the outline of a tall man standing exactly where I'd seen the stranger seconds earlier. The guard quickly turned around to check, but there was no one there. When we looked back at the glass, the shadow had disappeared. He grabbed his radio and called the control room to check the security cameras on that floor. Meanwhile, I tried to calm myself, repeating over and over that it could have just been an illusion caused by the lights in the hallway. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. A few minutes later, the security operator came on the radio saying he was watching the footage. The guard turned the volume up, and the voice on the other end sounded uneasy. "There's no one in the hallway, Karen. We can see you at the desk, but that's it." I asked him to rewind to the moment I screamed. The response came after a few seconds of silence. "You looked to your right, stepped back, and it seems like you screamed at someone, but on the cameras you're alone." The guard and I looked at each other. I was shaking and he seemed to be searching for some logical explanation, but the radio was still crackling. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. "There's something weird. The reception glass shows a shadow, but there's no one there to cast it." I walked to the reception window, not understanding how that was possible. Outside, there was only the empty parking lot, lit by a few dim streetlights. Yet the glass clearly reflected a silhouette, the outline of a man standing exactly where the guard was at that moment. Only the reflection didn't move. The guard noticed what I was seeing, stepped to the side, but the shadow stayed perfectly still, frozen in the same position. We both stared for a few seconds until he said in a serious tone, "Get out of here, Karen." He told me to go to the nurse's room while he called for backup. I left trembling, the sound of my footsteps echoing too loudly on the polished floor. I entered the room and closed the door, trying to listen for what was happening outside. His radio was still on, and I could hear fragments of conversation. "Yeah, third floor, shadow on the glass, and no one visible." Then silence. I waited a minute, maybe 2, until the radio crackled again, but the voice that came through wasn't the guard's. It was a low, raspy male voice speaking slowly. "She saw me." Story 3. Working overnight had always felt a bit strange, but I was used to it. I was the night janitor in an old 9-story commercial building in Denver, most of it filled with offices that stayed empty after dark. Usually, I was the only person in the entire building between midnight and 6 in the morning. The routine was always the same: vacuum the floors, check the bathrooms, take out the trash, and make sure all the doors were locked. Quiet. Predictable. That night, around 2:20 a.m., I was on the 5th floor when I heard a sound that made me stop. It was the noise of a vacuum cleaner running, coming from the floor above. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe the guy from the next shift had come in early to get a head start. I waited a few minutes, but then realized something strange. The sound wasn't moving. It stayed at the same pitch and rhythm, as if the vacuum were just sitting in one spot. I grabbed my radio to check in, but there was no answer. I looked at the employee access panel, which showed active keycards in the building. Only mine was registered at that time. No one else had entered. That sent a chill through me. Still, I took the elevator up to the 6th floor to check it out. When the doors opened, the sound was louder. The vacuum was definitely somewhere down the hall, vibrating softly against the carpeted floor. The lights on that floor were dim as usual at night, flickering slightly from the rainstorm outside that kept affecting the power. I walked slowly, calling out, "Hello? Anyone up here?" No answer. The sound came from the end of the hallway near the meeting rooms. When I turned the corner, I saw it. A vacuum cleaner sitting in the middle of the floor, plugged into the wall, its cord stretched tight. But no one was there. I stood there watching it for a few seconds. The cord wasn't moving, the machine just hummed on its own, the noise echoing through the empty floor. I walked over and switched it off, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Only the sound of my own heartbeat filled the air. Then I noticed something strange at the far end of the hallway. The elevator doors were open, and the digital display above them showed a floor that didn't exist, B3. The building only had 2 basements. I stared, trying to make sense of it, until I realized the elevator seemed to have just arrived from somewhere, its interior lights flickering like it had come up from below. I approached slowly, that gut feeling that something was off growing stronger. The panel flickered between B3 and 6, as if it couldn't decide where it was. The doors stayed open, the cabin dark except for a dim emergency light in the corner. I called on the radio again, but only static answered. I thought about stepping inside, but my body refused to move. Then suddenly the elevator chimed, that short beep before the doors close, and the panel locked onto B3. The doors closed slowly, and the sound of the motor started up again. The noise came from below, like it was descending. I went to the control panel in the hallway and tried to manually call the elevator back up, but nothing happened. A few seconds later, I heard the metallic whirring stop somewhere deep below. The display still read B3. I took a deep breath and decided to go down using the emergency stairs. Each step echoed through the concrete shaft, motion sensor lights flickering on and off as I descended. I passed B1, then B2. Below that, there was only a heavy iron door, locked with a padlock. Except that night, it was slightly open. The light down there was weak and unsteady, and the air smelled like dust and rust. I pushed the iron door gently. It creaked loud enough to echo up the stairwell. Behind it was a narrow corridor I'd never seen before. It looked like a maintenance area with damp concrete walls and electrical cables running along the ceiling. At the end of it, a rusted sign read, B3, Restricted Access. My stomach twisted. That floor didn't exist on the building plans, I knew it didn't. But the elevator display had shown that exact number. I took a few cautious steps inside, and then I heard it, the sound of the vacuum cleaner again, humming somewhere in the darkness. Only now it sounded distant, like it was coming from behind the walls. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. I turned back slowly, trying not to make noise, but before I could reach the stairs, I heard the metallic sound of the elevator doors opening behind me. I turned and saw the cabin's light flickering, and inside, resting in the corner, was the same vacuum cleaner I had turned off on the 6th floor. It was running again, the cord dragging across the floor. I froze, watching the vacuum hum inside the elevator, its cord stretched out of the doorway, dragging slowly along the ground, as if someone invisible were pulling it. The sound echoed down the narrow corridor, blending with the muffled noise of the elevator's gears. The cabin light flickered again, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow inside, the faint outline of someone standing behind the machine. But when I blinked, it was gone. I took a deep breath and stepped back, my heart pounding in my throat. The elevator chimed once more and the doors began to close slowly. Before they shut completely, the display flickered again. B3, then B2, and finally nothing. The sound of the motor rising filled the corridor, and I just stood there trying to process what I had seen. I ran back to the stairs and climbed 2 flights without stopping. When I reached the 6th floor, the elevator was already there. Doors open, completely empty. The vacuum was gone. The panel now showed only the number 6, as if nothing had happened. But on the floor, I noticed fresh wheel marks, leading from inside the elevator all the way down the hall, to the outlet on the wall where the plug still sat connected. And when I touched it, it was warm. Story 4. Working alone at the gas station during the night was something I had learned to live with. There was almost no movement after midnight, and the only sounds that broke the silence were the wind coming from the mountains and the faint buzz of the parking lot lights. That night, the air was still and the sky moonless. I passed the time checking stock and drinking reheated coffee, counting down the hours until my shift ended. It was a little after 2:30 a.m. when I heard tires stop near pump number 4. A dark Audi, far too clean for that kind of road, pulled in slowly. The driver got out right away wearing a light jacket and a cap. He seemed calm, but something about the tense way he held his shoulders caught my attention. I asked if he wanted a full tank, and he gave a quick nod without looking directly at me. As I started pumping the gas, I noticed something inside the car. A girl in the passenger seat, maybe 13 or 14 years old, her hair tied back in a ponytail, her gaze fixed downward. Her seatbelt was fastened and she held a small backpack tightly in her lap. She was completely still, unnaturally still, and that sent a chill through me. The man went into the store while the tank filled. He wandered through the aisles picking up random things, a soda, a bag of chips, and kept glancing at the window as if making sure the car was still there. I tried to act normal but couldn't stop watching. The girl didn't move. Her face was partly hidden by her hair, her head tilted slightly to the side. For a moment, I thought she was asleep, until I noticed her eyes were open. I stared for a few seconds and saw her lips move, barely perceptible, forming a single word. It took me a moment to understand what she'd said. I thought I was imagining it. Then she slowly lifted her face and murmured again. This time, I heard it clearly. "Help me." The sound was faint, barely audible through the closed window, but I heard it. My heart started racing. I looked toward the store and saw the man standing by the counter, pretending to browse. Trying to stay calm, I walked behind my counter and discreetly pressed the silent alarm button that called the police. When I looked back toward the pumps, the girl was staring straight ahead, motionless, as if nothing had happened. The man came back out with a small bag in his hand and gave me a strange look, quick, assessing. He asked if he could pay in cash, and while I counted the change, he kept his eyes fixed on mine, as if making sure I wouldn't say anything. As soon as he got his receipt, he got in the car and drove off faster than normal. I watched the taillights disappear into the dark road, the sound of the engine fading until all that was left was silence and the distant hum of the wind. It took about 5 minutes before I heard the sirens approaching. The police arrived quickly, searched the area, and asked to see the station's security footage. I showed them the recording. The Audi was clearly visible, the man fueling up, the girl in the passenger seat. But the moment she lifted her head to speak, the video glitched. The sound cut out, the image shook for 2 seconds, and when it cleared again, the car was already driving away. They tried to trace the license plate I had written down, but the system came back with something impossible. No record found, not in the state, not anywhere else. The car was never identified and the case was closed a few months later, but that night never left my mind. I spent days rewatching the footage, looking for anything I might have missed. The image of the girl lifting her face and whispering, "Help me," stayed burned into my memory. I started paying close attention to every car that stopped at the station, waiting to see something similar again. But it never happened. The police came back a few times to review the footage, and one of them said something that gave me chills. The strange thing is, seconds before the Audi shows up, the camera's already recording. but the road's completely empty. After that, I switched shifts and started working only in the mornings. I could never bring myself to stay alone there at night again. I still remember the last thing the investigator told me before closing the case. You know what's weird, Jake? That same car showed up at another station a few years ago. Same model, same plate. And the attendant there swore he heard a girl asking for help too. Ever since then, whenever I hear the sound of a car pulling in late at night, my whole body freezes for a moment, waiting, against my will, to hear that faint whisper from the passenger seat once more. Story 5. Working the night shift had always been something I liked. The silence, the calm rhythm, the feeling of having the entire hotel to myself. I was a front desk clerk at a small hotel in Vermont, an old 3-story building with narrow hallways and carpet that muffled every footstep. That night had been quiet, and all the guests were already in their rooms. It was almost 2 a.m. when I began my routine round through the second-floor corridor. I carried only a flashlight, my radio clipped to my belt, and a notepad. Like always. The hallway was dark except for the dim glow of the wall lamps. I walked along, checking that the doors were locked and listening for any noise coming from the rooms. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the hallway, standing completely still, was a man. He looked like a guest. Dark suit, hands in his pockets, head slightly tilted to one side. The nearby lamp didn't quite reach his face, so I could only see his outline. I thought maybe he had gotten lost or stepped out to ask for towels. I called out, "Sir, do you need anything?" No answer. He just stood there facing me. I took a few steps forward, trying not to show nervousness, and repeated the question. The man didn't move, and the only thing that shifted was the faint gleam of his shadow stretching along the wall behind him. When I got halfway down the hall, he took a slow, deliberate step backward and disappeared into room 214, closing the door without a sound. I froze. I knew exactly which rooms were occupied, and I was certain 214 was vacant. I grabbed my radio and called the security guard who patrolled the ground floor. He responded, asking what was going on, and I told him I needed him to come up and check something. While waiting, I walked closer to room 214. The number plate was slightly crooked, as if someone had tampered with it. I knocked softly. No answer. I tried the handle. It wouldn't move. Locked from the inside. The hallway was dead silent, and the only sounds I could hear were the faint ticking of the lobby clock and the buzz of the flickering fluorescent lights. The security guard, a guy named Mark, arrived a few minutes later, slightly out of breath with his flashlight in hand. I quickly explained what I'd seen and pointed to the door of room 214. He knocked hard, announced himself as security, and tried the handle. Still locked. "You're sure it was this room?" he asked, and I nodded. Then someone locked it from the inside. He picked up his walkie-talkie and asked the front desk to check the system for the current guest list. We waited, and after a moment the reply came through the static. Room 214 vacant. Last checkout was 4 days ago. I looked at Mark and he just shook his head, clearly trying to come up with a logical explanation. He decided to use the master key. As soon as the lock clicked open, a cold draft rushed out from the room, raising goosebumps on my arms. The window was open, the curtains swaying with the wind, and the bedside lamp flickered. The room looked completely normal. Bed made, towels folded, everything in order. But something on the carpet caught my eye. Wet shoe prints leading from the door to the center of the room, and stopping there. No return tracks, no sign of exit. Mark stepped in first, sweeping the room with his flashlight. I stayed by the doorway, watching. The air felt cold not just from the window but from the room itself, as if the space was holding its breath. It didn't feel empty. Mark knelt to examine the prints and muttered quietly, "These look fresh." He touched one with his finger, then looked up at me. His fingertip was damp. The carpet around it was dry, so it couldn't have been water tracked in from outside. I just stood there, trying to make sense of how someone could have entered and locked the door from inside. While he checked the bathroom, something in the mirror above the dresser caught my attention. From where I stood, I could see the reflection of the hallway, and for a split second I swear I saw the same man in the suit standing at the far end again, perfectly still. My heart jumped. I turned instantly, but the corridor was empty. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" Mark replied without looking back. Before I could answer, a metallic noise echoed from the elevator. When we stepped out of the room, the display panel showed a floor that didn't exist, 4B, and the doors were closing on their own. We ran toward it, but they shut before we got there. The sound of the motor grew faint, like the elevator was slowly descending, and the number 4B flickered on the display until it vanished. We looked at each other, speechless. The hotel only had 3 floors and the ground level. Mark tried calling the front desk on the radio, but the signal came through garbled and static-filled. He took a deep breath and said he'd go down the stairs to check the elevator's control panel. I stayed there alone in the hallway. When I turned back toward room 214, I noticed something I hadn't before. The door was closed again. I was sure we'd left it open. I walked toward it slowly, my heart beat loud enough for me to hear. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard a faint, rhythmic sound. Slow footsteps, pacing back and forth inside the room. I stepped back, but the noise continued. Then the doorknob began to turn on its own, stopping at the lock's limit. I ran straight for the elevator without looking back, and nearly collided with Mark coming up from the stairs. He told me the control panel was powered off, and that the elevator hadn't moved once that night. Story 6. Working the graveyard shift had never been a problem for me. The restaurant was on a back road in Michigan, and at that hour only truckers or tired travelers ever stopped by. The routine was simple: clean up, restock supplies, and wait for sunrise. Around 2:30 that night, the silence was absolute, just the constant hum of the fans and the buzz of the refrigerators. That's when I heard the first click. It was the freezer door, closing on its own. At first, I figured it was a seal issue, the kind of thing that happened when temperatures changed. I went to check. The kitchen floor reflected the cold white light from the LED panels, and the air was heavy, filled with the sharp smell of frozen meat and detergent. When I touched the handle, I noticed handprints on the metal surface, long, distinct smudges visible in the frost. No one else was there. The door opened with a snap, releasing a burst of freezing air that made my skin prickle. Inside, everything looked normal. Stacked boxes, a slick floor, and the steady hum of the compressor. Still, the air felt different, heavier, almost motionless. I shut the door and went back to the counter, trying not to dwell on it. Then I heard it again. Another click identical to the first from the same direction. This time it was followed by a faint creak, as if the door had slowly opened by itself again. I grabbed my phone and went to the office to check the security cameras. The main monitor showed the front of the restaurant and the parking lot, both empty. But when I tried to pull up the kitchen and hallway feeds, the cameras were offline. 3 of them, the exact ones covering the freezer area. The system showed a manual reset about 30 minutes earlier, using the access code of a former employee who had been fired 2 months ago for sneaking in during night shifts. My stomach twisted. I went back to the kitchen, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence, maybe a system error. But the moment I stepped in, the air was colder. The freezer door was now slightly open, a thin stream of vapor seeping out and spreading across the floor like smoke. The hum of the compressor was louder than usual, almost like metallic breathing. I shone my flashlight inside. Stacked boxes, some opened. On the floor, a single wet footprint pointed straight toward the exit. I called the manager. As I explained what was happening, the metallic sound echoed again. Click, followed by a soft thud, like something shifting inside. Before he could respond, the call dropped. My heart pounded. I stood frozen, unsure whether to run or lock the door. I waited a few seconds before finally gathering the courage to open the freezer again. The cold hit me like a wall, and everything looked the same. Only now, the footprint was gone. I slammed the door shut and took a couple of steps back. The compressor kept humming, but the sound faltered, uneven, as if something inside was stuck. I tried to distract myself by wiping down the counter, but my eyes kept drifting toward the hallway leading to the freezer. The lights flickered twice, and then the metallic click came again. The same sound, but closer this time. I grabbed the key to lock the freezer, but when I reached the door, it was already closed. I pressed my ear against the metal and heard a faint noise, a slow, scraping sound coming from inside. I backed away, phone still in hand. I called the manager again, and this time he answered. I told him everything, and he told me to stay calm and review the footage in the morning. I left at 6 without looking back. The next day, when I returned, the manager was waiting for me. He said he'd reviewed the overnight recordings and asked me to watch. The video showed me walking toward the hallway, and for a brief moment before the image cut out, a shadow crossed behind me, moving toward the freezer. Story 7. Working the night shift at the toll booth had never bothered me. The graveyard hours were lonely but peaceful. Less traffic, no small talk, just the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of trucks rolling down the highway. That night, the sky was overcast and the warm air made the booth's glass fog up from the inside. It was almost 3 in the morning when I noticed a car approaching slowly. A black sedan, headlights off, gliding down the lane until it stopped right in front of me. I waited a few seconds, thinking the driver was just looking for change, but he didn't roll the window down. The car sat there, engine running, completely still. I called the nearest support post on the radio, asking if there were any reports on the highway. The operator's voice came through with static, then silence. I tried again, but the line was dead. Outside, the engine's hum was low, steady, almost like a purr. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the car. The driver's seat was empty. The sight froze me for a few seconds. The car was idling, the engine running, but there was no one behind the wheel. No movement, not even a shadow in the back seat. The beam of my flashlight reflected off the glass and dashboard, and the more I looked, the less sense it made. There was no way someone could have gotten out without me seeing. The road was completely deserted, with forest on both sides, and I had a clear view for at least 100 meters in each direction. I tried hitting the emergency button on my control panel, but it only blinked red. No signal, no connection. The radio stayed silent. Then I heard it. A faint metallic clinking. Clink, clink, coming from inside my own booth. I turned quickly and saw the cash drawer slightly open. I walked over confused and noticed that some of the bills were missing. No sign of forced entry, nothing out of place. The car was still there in the exact same spot, and then I realized the engine had gone quiet without me noticing. I stood there staring through the window, trying to understand what was happening. The car didn't move and completely dark inside, and the only sound left was the wind brushing through the trees. My stomach tightened when I realized the engine had turned off by itself. I hadn't heard a click, not even a faint sound. My hand holding the flashlight trembled slightly, and my reflection in the glass looked pale. I took a deep breath and stepped outside, determined to check up close. The road seemed darker than before, as if the booth's lights no longer reached the car. I walked slowly, radio in my pocket, repeating to myself that it was probably an electrical issue or some trucker's prank. When I got closer, I saw that the driver's door was ajar, the keys still in the ignition. The seat was completely dry. Strange, considering it had started drizzling a few minutes earlier. I looked down and froze. There were footprints on the wet pavement leading from the door to the middle of the road, and then stopping abruptly, as if the person had simply vanished. I walked back to the booth slowly, never taking my eyes off the car. With every step, the silence grew heavier. Even the crickets had stopped. I shut the door, locked it twice, and sat down, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. I called my supervisor, but the line wouldn't connect, on just static. Then I looked at the radio. It was on even though I hadn't touched it. A faint voice repeated the same number over and over. 333. I turned it off and looked out the window again. The car was still there, but now it seemed closer to the booth. I hadn't heard the engine or the tires. Nothing. It had just moved. My spine went cold, and for the first time that night, I seriously thought about leaving. I grabbed my things, and when I looked back at the road, the car was gone. No headlights, no sound, nothing but wet asphalt and light rain tapping against the glass. When it vanished, I stood frozen for several seconds. Then the radio crackled back to life, this time with a low sound like breathing mixed with static. I pressed the call button and asked if anyone was on the line. No reply. Just the noise growing clearer, closer, until it sounded like it was coming from inside the booth right behind me. I turned slowly and saw the cash drawer open again. The missing bills were back, stacked neatly as if someone had just placed them there. I backed away from the desk, shaking, and bolted for the door. Outside, the wind had picked up and the highway lights flickered irregularly. The radio crackled one last time, and a deep voice said just 2 words. "Good night, Kathy." That was my name. I swear I never said it over the radio, not once. I ran back inside, shut everything off, and told myself it was interference, maybe some trucker messing around. When my shift ended, I left without looking back. The next morning, my supervisor showed me the night's report. The toll system hadn't logged any vehicles passing through at that time. Story 8. Working the night shift at that warehouse had always felt calm to me. The place was big but quiet. Rows of shelves stacked with boxes and the distant hum of industrial fans. I did my rounds every hour, and between them I'd sit in the monitoring room drinking coffee and listening to the radio. That night, it was almost 2 a.m. when the radio started to crackle. I thought it was just interference, until I clearly heard a low voice ask, "Are you alone there?" I figured it was one of the other guards trying to mess with me. I laughed and told him to cut the joke. Silence. I waited a few seconds and heard the same static again, followed by the sound of breathing. I leaned closer to the radio, adjusted the frequency, and asked who was speaking. This time, the voice repeated the same question. "Are you alone there?" But it sounded closer, clearer, as if the person was in the same room. I looked around, half amused, half uneasy, but there was no one. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore the chill running up my neck. I turned my attention back to the security cameras. Everything looked normal. Empty aisles, forklifts parked, nothing moving. Still, the radio kept hissing, the sound broken up by slow breaths. I tried turning it off, but it turned itself back on, the static now constant. I stared at it, wondering if it was some kind of frequency glitch, but the noise seemed to be getting nearer, as if someone was whispering right into the microphone. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to make another round just to be sure. The wind whistled through the gaps in the doors, mixing with the echo of my footsteps on the concrete. At every corner, I expected to see someone, a coworker playing a prank, but there was no one. When I returned to the monitoring room, my stomach dropped. In the corner of the main screen, on the camera pointed at my own station, I saw a clear silhouette standing behind my chair. I turned around fast, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The chair behind me was pushed up against the wall. There wasn't even space for anyone to stand there without me noticing. I looked back at the monitor, and the shadow was still there, motionless, standing exactly where I had been seconds earlier. I switched to another camera, then back again. The shadow was gone. A metallic sound echoed down the main corridor like one of the iron doors had slammed shut. I picked up the radio again and asked if anyone was there. No answer, just static, louder now. I started down the hallway, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The air was colder than usual, much colder than it should have been inside the warehouse. The emergency lights flickered, throwing moving shadows with every step. When I was halfway down the corridor, the radio crackled again, and the same voice whispered, "Don't look behind you." I froze completely, trying to convince myself it was a prank, but something in me refused to turn around. Still, curiosity won. I turned slowly, the flashlight beam shaking, only boxes and metal racks. Nothing else. No movement, no sound. I exhaled, trying to stay calm, and walked slowly toward the end of the hall, the radio still clipped to my belt. Each step echoed louder, as if the place were much bigger than it really was. When I reached the door to the main storage area, I saw my flashlight's reflection trembling across the metal shelves. That's when I noticed something that made me stop cold. A second light, dimmer, moving deeper inside. Someone else had a flashlight. I called over the radio, my voice trembling, asking if anyone had entered without authorization. This time a reply came, but it wasn't from any coworker. It was the same deep voice from before, speaking slowly. "You shouldn't be here." The sound didn't come from the radio. It came from inside the warehouse itself. Backing up, I turned my flashlight toward the office and started running, my heart hammering. When I got back to the monitoring room, all the cameras were black, except one, the feed showing the corridor I had just walked through. On that screen, a shadow stood motionless at the corner, facing the camera. I stepped away from the monitor and turned off the room lights, trying to breathe slowly. The shadow on the screen stayed perfectly still, but now it seemed slightly closer to the camera than before. I grabbed the emergency phone and dialed my supervisor. As it rang, the camera's light began to flicker, as if something were blocking it. The line didn't connect, just loud static, then silence. Then the radio on the desk, and the one I'd left turned off, switched on by itself and played back my own voice. "Is anyone there?" My blood ran cold. I moved toward the door, but before leaving, I glanced at the monitor one last time. The shadow was gone. Everything was silent for about 10 seconds, until I heard a faint breathing sound coming from the hallway. I shut the door and leaned against it, too afraid to move. When the sun finally came up, the next shift guard found me locked in the room, pale as a sheet. I showed him the recordings, but every file from that night was corrupted except for one frame. Me, staring at the monitor, and behind me, a figure standing exactly where the shadow had been. Story 9. Working the early morning shift at the bakery had always been part of my routine. I'd open the place around 3:30 a.m. to start the first batch of bread and get the counter ready before business picked up. The street was almost always empty at that hour, and the only steady sounds came from the refrigerator and the oven preheating. Every morning, right at 4 a.m., the delivery truck would stop out front to drop off the sacks of flour and sugar. It was always the same driver, a quiet but polite man who'd wave from the cab before unloading. That morning the clock read 4:05 when I heard the sound of the engine outside. I looked through the window and saw the white truck parked in its usual spot. The driver was in the seat, arm resting on the window, waving slowly, just like every other morning. I waved back and kept arranging the counter, waiting for him to get out. But he didn't. I waited a couple of minutes, then 5, and still nothing. The engine kept running, exhaust puffing into the cold air. I decided to step outside and check, thinking maybe he was sick or taking a quick nap. I went out through the side door, the cold air hitting my face. The street was completely silent, and the truck's engine sounded louder than usual, echoing between the building facades. I walked closer, calling his name. "Tom?" No answer. When I got close enough, I noticed the passenger door was slightly open, swaying gently with the wind. The cabin light was on, illuminating the empty seats. I circled around the bumper and looked inside. The driver's seat was empty. The engine was still running, and the radio was hissing softly, giving off a faint static hum. The keys were still in the ignition, and on the seat was a folded piece of paper, a delivery note with the bakery's name and the correct date. Everything looked normal except for one thing. The truck was empty, as if the driver had simply vanished seconds earlier. A chill ran down my spine. The dashboard clock read 4:08, and the fuel gauge needle was twitching, moving erratically. The hum of the engine filled the silence of the street. I called his name again, louder this time, and walked toward the back of the truck. The tarp over the cargo bed was secured, but one of the buckles was swinging, tapping lightly against the metal. Talk, 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 in sync with my breathing. I stepped up onto the bumper and lifted the tarp just enough to peek inside. The boxes were neatly stacked and strapped down. No sign of anyone. I went back to the cab, trying to make sense of what had happened. The radio was still hissing, and then I noticed something strange about the sound. Beneath the static were faint, rhythmic pauses, almost like someone was trying to speak. I turned the volume down and listened carefully. For a moment, I swear I heard a low, muffled voice whisper something that sounded like, "Behind you." I spun around instantly, but the street was empty. Only the dim glow of the streetlight and the bakery door still ajar. The only movement was the thin trail of vapor rising from the oven vent. My heart was pounding. I was still standing beside the cab, one hand on the door, trying to process what I'd heard. The radio seemed to return to normal static, but now there was a faint scratching sound, like something brushing the microphone. I stood there for several seconds scanning the street until I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The delivery note that had been on the driver's seat was gone. I looked around the ground thinking it might have fallen, and then I saw it. The paper was tucked under the windshield wiper outside. I approached slowly and took it. It was folded again, but this time there was something handwritten on the back. Shaky letters that read, "Turn off the radio." My stomach dropped. I climbed into the cab, hand trembling, and switched it off. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. The engine was still running, but weaker now, like it was losing power. Then came a sound from the back of the truck, a single, heavy metallic thud, like something large had fallen inside. I froze, heart pounding, and caught movement in the rearview mirror. The tarp shifted slightly as if something inside had moved. With my phone flashlight shaking in my hand, I walked around to the back. The tarp was fluttering softly, pushed from underneath, and the engine now sounded muffled, like it was underwater. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide whether to call the police or check it myself. In the end, curiosity won over fear. I climbed the step again and pulled the tarp back carefully. The beam of light cut through the dark interior, and for a split second I saw something moving between the boxes. A low, quick shape, like someone ducking to hide. I called out the driver's name, but there was no answer. I took a step back. My foot slipped on the damp metal and I hit my shoulder against the side of the truck. The pain made me drop my phone and it fell to the ground, its light shining into the cargo bed. That's when I saw the footprint, right at the edge of the truck. A fresh, dark mark, as if someone had just jumped down, but the prints led straight out into the middle of the road, and then stopped. Story 10. It was around 2:30 in the morning when the office phone started ringing. I was alone on the night shift, going through reports and trying to keep my eyes open after a cup of coffee that was way too weak. The building was old, and working there at night always gave me a strange feeling, like the air was heavier somehow. The sound of the phone breaking the silence made my heart jump. I looked at the screen and saw it was coming from the supervisor's desk, the same guy who'd been on vacation for almost a week. I answered, assuming it was some kind of system glitch. As soon as I put the receiver to my ear, a man's voice said, "Don't hang up, I'm in the elevator." The voice was calm, low, but there was something about it that froze me completely. It took me a few seconds to respond, and when I asked who was speaking, there was silence. Then, after a faint crackle on the line, the same voice repeated, "Don't hang up." That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The elevator didn't operate at night. It shut down automatically at 11 p.m., and only the supervisor had access to the main control panel. For a moment I didn't move, listening only to the clock ticking on the wall and the low hum of the air conditioner. None of it made sense. The elevator couldn't possibly be running, and no one was authorized to use it. I tried to stay calm and asked again who was speaking, but the line went dead. I glanced at the control panel on the wall and confirmed. The elevator's power circuit was indeed off. Still, the air felt different now, a faint vibration as if something inside the building had started moving. I grabbed my ID badge and ran to the security room where the camera feeds were displayed. The monitors showed empty hallways and floors, except for the ground level. There, the elevator doors were open, motionless, with the panel light showing G. I stared at the screen, waiting for someone to step out, but no one did. Just the dark, empty space between the doors. Then the phone on the desk started ringing again. I hesitated for a few seconds before picking it up. The same voice returned, softer this time, saying, "I told you not to hang up." That sentence left me completely frozen. The voice was too calm, unhurried, and it sounded close. Uncomfortably close, like someone whispering right next to my ear, even though I was holding the phone away. I asked who was speaking and where he was. This time I heard something new. The creak of an elevator moving slowly, followed by a faint chime. I looked back at the monitors, and the elevator indicator now showed it was going up. But that was impossible. The system was physically powered down and the building was completely empty. The display showed the elevator stopping on my floor. I stared at the screen as the doors slid open by themselves. No one came out. But the corridor lights began to flicker, one by one, in sequence, heading straight toward the office where I was. I dropped the phone, the clatter echoing sharply in the quiet room. I ran to the door and locked it, trying not to look at the frosted glass. Even so, I saw a shadow glide past, moving down the hallway, and the sound of heavy footsteps stopped right outside my door. I stood still, sweaty hands gripping the handle, barely breathing. The footsteps had stopped, but I could still hear something faint. Breathing, or maybe the soft squeak of wet shoes on the floor. The hallway lights kept flickering, and with each pulse, the shadow outside changed shape, stretching across the frosted glass. A chill crawled up my back. I reached for my cell phone to call building security, but there was no signal. Every number failed to connect. Suddenly, the office phone started ringing again. The sound filled the entire room, so loud it made me jump. I stared at it. 1 ring, 2, 3, before forcing myself to answer. As soon as I did, the same voice whispered, "You shouldn't have hung up." And then, the lights went out. The only thing left was the slow, blinking red light of the phone button, pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I dropped the receiver and backed up against the wall, straining to see anything in the dark. The sound of the elevator returned, closer now, with the metal doors opening and closing repeatedly. Each clang echoed through the hallway, and beneath it I could swear I heard a faint voice repeating the same phrase from before. "Don't hang up." I went to the window, thinking about climbing out, but I was on the 5th floor and heavy rain was now pouring outside. After a few seconds, the elevator noise stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. I waited, not daring to move, until I heard a faint click at the door handle, slow, deliberate, as if someone was testing whether it was locked. The phone rang again, but I didn't answer this time. The sound grew distorted, breaking into a harsh static. When the lights finally flickered back on, the office door was slightly open. I stepped into the hall. The elevator stood there with its doors wide open, empty. Only one thing was different. The internal phone on the elevator panel was off the hook, swinging gently back and forth.
I'm really grateful for staying until the last minute. It's always good to know that you're here, listening to every detail. If you liked it, comment which part was the scariest for you. And of course, sign up to keep listening to stories as dark as this one. See you in the next video.